Well, if you're a 2022 X3 named the Rex 3, it's a great day to be you. And if that's not your name, if you're a normal human being, it's also a great day, especially if you like watching work get done and seeing cool parts get installed. Today we're going to be putting my X3 back together, whole front end, plastics, differential, suspension, and the part that I'm most excited for, brand new skid plate. This thing has plagued me for so long. Looking dilapidated, hanging down. The OEM one, not cutting it. Our friends at Factory UTV came through and hooked up old Richard Rules. Check this unit out. This absolute beast of piece of plastic and aluminum, we'll talk about that in a minute, showed up yesterday, and it is massive. So this is the Factory UTV X3 skid plate. I went with a 1/2-inch version. They also make a 3/8 version, and I opted to get their X brace. We'll show you that in a minute. But this thing is extreme duty, guys. So this is made out of UHMW, ultra high molecular weight plastic, which means it's dense, it's thick, it's heavy. So this is designed to be drug across things and not have it impact it. It's designed to slide and hold up and just be a tough piece. So not going to show you the shipping label because it's got my address on it, but this weighed 73 pounds. And compared to the OEM one, this is the rear section. That's about 5 pounds. That's about 10 pounds. So much heavier, much thicker. Just bringing the beef. USDA guaranteed. This thing is a solid piece, man. While I wasn't super excited to add a bunch of weight to the Rex 3, I think this is an area that needs this kind of mass. So, in being on the, very bottom of the machine, center of gravity, thinking about electric cars and how good they handle and stuff, I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. But let's get this thing cut open and look at the individual pieces of it, because I'm telling you, this thing, it's a nice unit. Oh yeah, #1 employee showing up to inspect the new parts. Nice work. So this is a 3-piece skid plate. So this is going to be the midsection. Here's the front that will cover the area like where the front differential's at. And then this is the back piece. And here's where the X brace comes in. So this aluminum piece is what they consider the X brace. So it's going to go up here towards the end of the skid plate at the very back of it. And it just sandwiches between the frame and the skid plate. And why that's important, we can see if we look at my old skid plate. So the back of the machine is a very common area that just gets drug over rocks and a bunch of other stuff. So a lot of sliding going on here, tears this thing up. So that reinforcement is going to be crucial in keeping everything together and toughening the back of this thing up. But like I said, this stuff is just, it's literally 2 times the thickness of the factory stuff. This is a super nice setup. So I'm going to be one man installing this. And what's nice is it being 3 pieces, obviously you don't need to just put it in all at once. So the way it overlaps is the rear section goes in first, then the midsection, and then the front at the end. So I'm going to get the rear section in, and then the midsection, I'm probably going to leave that out, the front section, until I have the whole front end of the machine back together. But before I tackle this, I'm going to work on getting these inner fenders. So I picked some new OEM BRP stuff up. Nothing too crazy. And I'm just going to throw that stuff in. If I can find them, I'll show you. I think I did in the last video, but you guys saw that these panels were riveted in. So if, I'm probably going to catch some stuff from Polaris guys from using their parts, but these are a very common screw on Polaris machines. They have a T40 head, and they're like a self-drilling end on them. So they work really well on BRP stuff where there's rivets. These just run right in. So I'm just going to utilize these instead of the rivets. So I'm going to get those plastic pieces thrown in. Hopefully that goes smooth. On the driver's side one, you guys may remember, instead of disconnecting the steering, I opted to just notch this piece of plastic out to slide over the steering. I'm going to do that on this one as well. Doesn't really add any structure or support to it, so I'd rather not mess with the steering. Works pretty good. Don't want to risk anything happening to it. So I'm going to get these thrown in quick. Shouldn't be a big deal. Hopefully just bolt in and move on to the next piece of the puzzle. I'm telling you, this guy's here to work today, making up for slacking the past couple times. So we got to transfer some of these clips over from the old one to the new one. These hold the fender that we took off on. So no big deal. Just a little screwdriver, pop those off. Well, things are going pretty smooth. We know how it goes when I say that, but the passenger side is all installed nice and tight. Went in easy. Over here, I've just got a couple more bolts I got to put in, or a couple more of the self-tappers. I figured I'd show you guys how those work. So this was originally a rivet, or this piece was riveted in right here, I should say. And so far, I've just screwed this in by hand, and it's staying there. So it pretty much is going to work like any other self-tapper. No big deal. So if you guys are working on X3s, I encourage you to look these screws up. They're very handy when you're working on this stuff if you don't want to rivet everything again. And it's a lot easier to service if you ever got to take anything apart. All right, got a lot of the Rex 3 put back together last night. Body-wise, not the actual cool stuff that we're putting back in this thing, but take a look at where we're at right now. So it's beginning to look like an X3 again. So all these new plastic pieces went together. Super good. This guy. Just looking at things. Must be nice. So next thing I'm going to do is put this rear portion of the skid plate on. So I need to crawl under the machine and make sure all the rivets are actually out. So I'm probably just going to take a punch and a hammer and knock those out if there's any pieces of those remaining in there. And then once that's all cleaned up, be able to slide the skid plate on a jack underneath there and then lift it up. So this factory UTV skid plate utilizes self-tapping screws. If you want to use riv nuts, you can also do that. I figured I'd just use the self-tapping screws, and if they loosen up in the future, I can always riv nut it in. They give you a pretty big hole to work with, so that's convenient for if there's any need for future repairs. But for right now, I'm going to crawl underneath, get that cleaned up, and then I'll show you guys what it's like putting that skid plate on. All right, guys, we're live under the Rex 3. I got all the rivets out of this thing. Skid plate's ready to go on, but I figured I would show you why the X-brace is important. So you can see here we have this crucial component to our X3 known as the transmission. And see this flimsy piece of metal here that's like pushed up into the critical component known as the transmission? Yeah, that's not good. So the X-brace is going to protect all this stuff underneath here. Very important stuff, even, you know, the engine. But the engine's protected by this part of the frame, I guess. But all this exposed transmission, you're just relying on that 1/4 inch thick plastic skid plate to keep this thing safe. So I'm going to see if I can straighten this piece out a little bit before we climb under here with the rear portion of the skid plate. And yeah, come along pretty good though. Excited to see how it looks installed. So I was under here with some pry bars, still am actually. That's why I'm taking the video, but you know what I mean. And yeah, just to kind of further show why the X-brace is important, guys, look at how much that piece of thin metal has dug into the transmission of this thing, into the case. Like, it might not come through super good on video, but that is a huge gouge. That sucks. That's not good. That's really bad, actually. So I'm going to see if I can get this factory piece pried down a little bit more so there's some extra clearance, but yeah, skid plates, turns out good ones are a good idea to start with, guys. Factory ones, if you're going to ride hard, they ain't going to cut it. Unless you're talking about cutting into your transmission. All right, you can see my setup I got here. We've got the skid plate on the jack. Start towards the back and going to work our way towards the front. So I've just got a couple of these self-tapping screws installed loosely in here. And I took a 13/16 drill and just kind of cleaned up the holes for these first. And so I'm going to move the jack towards the front of the machine and work on getting a couple more of these started at least. But you can see from the outside where that X-brace ties in, right underneath our critical driveline components. And then what I'm also a big fan of compared to the stock skid plate, like I said, there's a ton of different factory Can-Am skid plates. I don't know why, but this one gives us the protection over the CVT cover, which I think is super important. But yeah, it's looking super good, looking super beefy. So I'm just going to keep putting screws in this thing, and I'll show you guys when we're ready to put that middle section in. All right, midsection is about ready to go in. So I've got all the bolts in the back section, X braces in. Let's look at this one more time. It's just a beautiful piece. Super nice. So we're going to put this on the floor jack and lift it up into place. So the back section actually overlaps the rear, or the midsection overlaps the back section with these bolts right here. So I've already been under there, pre-drilled all the existing holes. So that should be taken care of, should be going in, no problem. Just got to get this thing on the jack, lift it up, and start putting bolts in this thing. No big deal. Also, how do you guys think the skid plate would hold up to some Freedom devices, if you know what I mean? I'm not going to say the G word, but I don't know. What do you guys think? Maybe I can convince Factory UTV to send me a piece of this stuff and we can test out some Freedom devices on this. See how it would work compared to the old one. I don't know. All right, guys, here's how I'm doing this. It's worked pretty decent for that rear section. Try it out for this midsection now. This piece, obviously, a lot bigger. Weight-wise, I don't know how much bigger it, or how much more it weighs compared to that rear section. The rear section had the X-brace piece, so that added a little to it. Let's get this thing under here, ballpark it. Probably needs to go ahead a little bit. Once you have this thing up to where it can be sandwiched, or at least contacting the machine, makes it pretty easy. I have a second floor jack that may come in handy for supporting the other side. I don't know. We'll see about that. But if we can at least get that sandwiched. Oh no, the jack, you clown. No. Somehow the jack was going down. Bad deal. Bad deal. All right, we're going back. Some of this factory beat up plastic is in the way, so kind of gotta go fishing a little bit to get this lined up. Might have taken. I think so. Well, guys, my rock sliders are kind of holding the front of this from going up. I don't know if I can somehow get this to sandwich in between there. That'd be ideal. I don't really know how to modify this. So what I've found best is kind of positioning the jack around the location of the screw that you're putting in so you can apply pressure up. Because this stuff is, it's thick, it's hard to move with. All right, everything's going good on the skid plate install. However, as we've worked our way forward, skid plate's coming up. We found that little bit of an interference here between the skid plate and this rock slider I have. So probably gonna have to notch the skid plate out a little bit to clear that. I was hoping I could just kind of tuck it behind, but with as thick and heavy duty as that stuff is, I don't think that's gonna be an option. So I got my oscillating tool around here somewhere. I gotta go get a new bit for that. So I'm gonna run to Home Depot, grab that, and then we'll just make a little, be good to go. All right, we're in business now. So took the oscillating tool, got a new bit, notched that piece out. Fits good. Did the same thing on the other side. Now the skid plate's coming up to where it needs to be, so we're gonna head back underneath, run a couple more screws in. Skid plate's on, all tightened up. Looks fantastic. You guys just got to see this thing. It's after looking at that dilapidated thing for the past year, this is just, I almost want to just flip this on its side so I'm able to see it. Probably shouldn't do that though. All right, let's climb on under here. So big fan of these guards that come up, even though I had to do a little trimming right there. That's going to protect that plastic where the last piece got ventilated. So that's super nice. And that stuff cut pretty hard. So leads me to believe it's going to hold up to rocks and all that other stuff very well. But underneath here, it's beautiful. Now there's two, and they're actually on the same position on each side. Two of the fasteners I'm going to have to get bigger self-tapping screws for because the holes were a little blown out. Nobody likes that. So, well, outside of that, went on pretty easy. Like I said, one-person job with a floor jack. Wasn't that big of a deal, but if you have an extra set of hands, it certainly would help. It's very nice. Factory UTV. Appreciate you. Just figured I'd throw this in here. Kind of easy to get carried away with your impact when you're putting these self-tappers in. So what I did is I just ran them in, and then I would push up on this with my hand. You could use a floor jack or something too, but I just tightened it until the washers stopped spinning. So you don't want to go overboard, run into some problems there, then you'll need the oversized screws. Hey, mister. So with two rear sections of our skid plate on, only the front remains, but we got to put that on once we have our control arms on and everything, because in order to get to the bolts for the control arms, got to have that piece out of the way. So we're just going to save that for the very end. And we're going to have to drill some holes into the frame to accommodate that because there's no provisions on this specific frame for that piece, which is no big deal. But right now, we're going to get to putting this thing back together, throwing that differential in. We've got to change some heims on the tie rods. Arms can go in. And you guys might remember before, on the upper control arms, I had an issue with some clearance on the gusset kit to the grease zerk on the upper control arm. Rather than modify the gusset kit to clear these 90-degree zerks, I just went with these flush mount ones that you use like a needle greaser to lubricate. So, simple solution there. Shouldn't be a big deal. Got to pop that sway bar link off. We can get going back together. Made some good progress. Let's take a look where we're at so far. All right, differentials in. Our upper gusset kit brace is all tightened down. I was talking about tie rods. You can see there's no tie rods in here. Well, I'm going to show you why. So, our passenger side tie rod, got everything swapped over. No big deal. And unfortunately, the driver's side was well, she didn't want to cooperate, so I tried heating this thing up to get the rod end out, and it just came out super bad. So, as you can see, this tie rod is it's ruined. So we won't be putting tie rods in this thing today, but should be able to at least get the clevis ends onto, or the rod ends onto the clevises on the rack. And then once we do get tie rods, should be able to just spin them on there. Shouldn't be a super big deal. So I'm going to do that and keep trucking away at putting this thing back together. We're going to get to the point where the lower control arms have to go on. That's going to be the most difficult part because both sides have to go on at once just because of how it works with this gusset kit. So that's kind of a pain, but we'll get it. No big deal. Just taking our time, figuring things out. Just happy to have this thing back together soon. Well, guys, that's it's not a complete Maverick X3. Not really what I wanted to see happen tonight, but this is where I got to quit. So, unfortunately, this thing has literally just fought me every step of the way going back together. It's literally been put it together and then have to take it apart for one reason or another. So I've spent about 3 hours trying to get these control arms to go in. It's not an easy task. There's bolts that have to go certain ways, certain length bolts that were going in super hard. And then once they went in, determined that they were too long and they needed to go in the other, it's just huge pain. So unfortunately, that's where I'm going to leave off on this thing today, because I'm going to be going to Tennessee tomorrow to pick up something pretty cool, bringing that back here to Michigan. So I got to wake up early for that, get packed and ready for that trip. So Rex 3 is going to have to wait another day to go back together, unfortunately. But appreciate you guys tuning in. Big shout out again to Factory UTV for getting this thing hooked up with its nice freaking skid plate, 1/2 inch thick, UHMW, freaking X-brace skid plate. Thing's going to be able to freaking skid over mountains and knock them down. So big thank you to you guys for watching these videos. And I'll see you guys in a couple days from Tennessee. Bye-bye.